So, at the conference today, a treat, two absolute legends. We have Dr. Don Hanlon Johnson from the California Institute of Integral Studies, who started the somatic psychology program and doctorate there. You get that right?
Mm-hmm.
And Bainbridge Cohen. So, movement artist, researcher, educator, therapist, and founder of Body Mind Centering, together in one place. Two legends and elders. So, welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
These two are old friends. So maybe let's just have a little bit of biographical. Where does it begin for you? What sparked your interest in the body? I know, Bonnie, you have a very interesting life story.
My parents were with the Ringling Brother Barnum and Bailey Circus. And my mother was a dancer before that, and during that and after. And so when she was pregnant, I suspect she moved a lot, because she said I danced in the womb, very active. I was also born with fetal alcohol syndrome. That was very common in drinking, smoking, and coffee. It was her diet. So I feel that created that sensitivity we talked about earlier. And how does one live with a sensitivity that is just in your earliest cellular memory? And how to glean the gift of it within the curse of it. So one of the things that I feel is that I'm not afraid of people's stories.
Mm-hmm.
We were talking earlier, I don't like to read, I did younger, but I don't like to read stories about violence, or trauma is big these days as a label, because I feel I have my own stories, and I've heard so many stories that are real, in which I can be part of. And to read a story in which I have no relationship to, I can just read the story, is too much. But if someone has a real story, then I can engage with them. And also, we often will label something as being a problem, or that, oh, that poor person, or such bad whatever, trauma, that can we not waste it? We don't want to create it, but can we not waste what we suffer? And find the inner power of it, and love, which I read in your book so beautifully over the last few days. So that's in my cells. So when people say, can you move from your cells? Or that's, I remember we had a meeting once, Dawn and I were there, and I was talking about cellular breathing. And one of the participants said, do you mean the cells can recognize each other and know what's going on? And I was kind of dumbfounded at the moment. And you came in, and I will always remember and being grateful, you said, that is the question. Perfect. In your Dawn way. And then people will say, was it a metaphor? And I say, it is. If you don't feel it, it's a metaphor. And that's fine. That's what you feel. But if you feel it, then it's reality. Both are real. And there's not one that's better than the other. And often we will begin with metaphor. So thank God we have a cortex and a frontal lobe and imagery. And then how that cortical thinking can arrive at whatever the metaphor, the image. But then, how do we let go once we found the place to receive what's there? And it's an awareness act, not a motor act. So awareness is a motor act. We usually say sensory and motor, but the awareness is more than sensation. It's a motor act because it brings forth whatever is there. So I went more than history, but I would like to say another thing, so history, otherwise I'll forget, that again I was apparently 3 times nearly died my first year, so I feel like that created a bridge for me between life and death at a, talking about pre-level, pre-verbal level, but even a pre-identity level. And then when I was 4, I had polio, which paralyzed my spine for 2 months. So I learned quietude. I'm saying this because you said that many people will come to this conference. And of course we don't want people to suffer, but we do. And that quietude is so powerful. The other things, but I'll go forward because it's a body-mind kind of thing. That I broke my arm when I was 10 and I couldn't use it for 2 years, and it was like this as a child. Now I can open it, not all the way, I don't have full sensation. But I know a path. And when I was 21, I was working in a hospital as an occupational therapist. I was actually interning. And a man had a stroke and he couldn't use, I don't remember now, I think it was his severe left paralysis at right brain, stroke. And in those days, this would have been 1963, he had his arm in a sling because it was sublux, very low tone, which happens, and then usually it becomes high tone later. And as an occupational therapist, I was told that I should help him become one-handed. But of course he didn't want to be one-handed. He was probably quite a bit younger than I am now, in his 60s, and businessman, and had been successful. So I took his arm out of the sling and I held it. And if you had put a piece of beef in my hand, it would have felt the same. I didn't know what I was holding. And I vowed that someday I would know what was in my hands. And I'm very good at that today. I don't know ahead of time because it didn't happen yet. So I'm not imposing what I know into what I feel. But that man, I didn't waste his suffering. So those are, then I could go further, but I'm bringing that out, something that I think your book, actually, you were talking about trauma quite a bit, and I'm in conferences a few times where this is a main topic. And I'm glad it's a main topic, that we're looking at trauma. But I'd like to add that as long as we have it, let's find the gift of it, as well as the deep suffering that we all have. And I'll say one other thing in regards to that. There was a woman in the late 80s, I think, no, maybe 1990. We were at the end of a training, and she went disassociated in one of the last seminars before she left the program. And I could be with her until a point, and I realized I can't follow her any further. So I said to her, this is the extent of my experience. I can't follow you any further. You'll have to come back. You can explore it further another time, but not with me, because I can't help you. I can't accompany you. So she came back into her body, and she said, I never knew that I could come back.
Bonnie, this is just huge riches already. There's so many topics I'd love to go more into. And I'd love to bring Don in a little bit. Don, is there anything that you can bounce off there that introduces yourself and your own background?
Yeah. Yeah, I think that what's emerged a lot for me lately, particularly as I get older and all my friends are dying and all that, is thinking more through what you talked about, trauma. And I realized that I just feel so lucky I stumbled into all of you because my beginning was so bad. My birth was horrendous. I was premature because the doctor was going on vacation, and then my mother had cesarean, which was an emergency cesarean, and as she told me laughingly when Hannah was about to be born, it was just kind of weird the way they put you in a nursery and they put you on a schedule. They would bring you in every 3 hours to get nursed. And it seemed like you didn't quite like it very much. And so I started out, and then my spine was fused from the beginning, and so I had no spinal movement, and then my whole childhood was riddled with sickness and dysfunction and so forth. I have chronic pain my whole life and blah, 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 blah. And then on top of that, of course, I fell off a cliff, 8 years ago and broke my neck and all my ribs. And last year I almost died with 5 months of pneumonia. So, in fact, the last time I saw you, you were helping me with that mess. So, and yet here I am.
Skiing.
Skiing, yeah, I've been skiing, cross-country skiing. So, it's like you say, and the thing that's striking to me is once you scratch the surface, everybody is in this stage. And, the worst thing is when people argue about whose suffering's worse. And I've thought a lot about in later years about how much better the world would be if we could just all say, it's been really hard being human beings, wherever you happen to be. Let's just settle together as a community of suffering and see how we can make it, what was the phrase you used a minute ago? Make it pay off or something? You had a really interesting phrase about the trauma, that we don't waste the trauma. That's a really good phrase. That somehow that we realize that life is suffering. I mean, the Buddhists say it their way and the Christians say it their way and so forth, but it's true. It's like, it's not just a spiritual teaching, it's really there, but we fight so hard to not acknowledge that piece of it. So I think this focus on reaping the benefits of our trauma. So when I broke my neck and all my ribs, I said, I've got to take myself seriously here. So it really made me get much more serious about all the things I know from all of our friends and teachers and stuff about breathing and exercising and stuff. And then when I had the pneumonia, I just really upped the ante of recovering my lungs, which is partly why I went skiing, So that's kind of one of the thoughts I have. And I did want to say that one of the things I've also reflected a lot lately, and it's a huge difference between you and me, which is why I think that we make a good couple, is my life there's a beautiful sense of order about my life. I've recently done, in the last year or so, a lot of research in ancestry and all that, and I know all of my great-grandparents. I know a lot about them, I know where they were born, I know, and each generation of all of my great-grandparents slowly built a better world for those of us who came after. Mm-hmm. So now there are these 5 generations from them down to my granddaughter, that it's totally predictable, safe, supportive, and a level of stifling quality to it. that I had to get away from. So even though I so much appreciate the order and containment in my life, and like my grandfather built the house my father grew up in, and my father built the house that I grew up in, and there was this, and my grandfather built a cradle that now all of our kids have been raised in, that I appreciate that, and the wildness of the human spirit was missing. It was also too tame and contained and orderly. And so, but how to do that in a way that's meaningful, not just Tim Leary style, is the issue. And you and Emily are examples to me of such wildness of the human spirit, but in a creative mold that allows it to proliferate in a beautiful way. So
Emily Conrad.
Yes.
Yeah, great.
I am very proud. One of the great achievements of my life is to bring the two of them together.
Wonderful. I want to see another wonderful interview on YouTube. That was part of my prep for this, was watching that beautiful interview. Yeah, so we've got a couple of deep themes, I think, already here. So the kind of existential, the early, difficult early things, polio, fetal alcohol syndrome in your case, the circus as well, the high wire and your mother racing, standing on top of horses, and gangsters and people trying to kill her are being around. Like, I've heard some of these stories. Like, this is like a whole, the first few years of your life is a wild film right there. And also at the end of life, like you falling off a cliff and, pneumonia, and we, just in terms of ages, you're 80...
I'll be 86 in a couple of weeks.
86 in a couple of weeks, and 78, got that right? So kind of the beginning of life, difficult, the last act of life, if I may say, not necessarily easiest, particularly for yourself, and the whole life's work in the middle. I do want to come to that. So it feels like that's a theme here.
It does feel easier to me now than ever.
Easier than ever?
Yeah.
Say more?
Well, I feel good, basically. I have pains and stuff, but I don't care. Because my life is great. All my friends and my home and my family. And I'm happy.
You just become a grandfather.
Yeah.
One of the great joys.
So, no, I feel more chronically happy than I was.
Chronically happy.
The rest of my life. Chronically, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And Bonnie, for me, you've always had this like otherworldly quality a little bit, and I wasn't sure if it was you had this. Sometimes a cat has this, like that quality of like you're a mystic as well as an embodiment teacher. Is that fair to say?
I love knowing the answers to your questions.
Or there's a difficulty in the same way as in the mystic. It's what we can't put into words. There's a way in which sometimes your somatic work, I find it hard to describe to people, or hard to get my own head around. I was on the way here and someone said, "Who's this person you're interviewing?" I said, "Oh, she's called Bainbridge Cohen. She's a founder of Body Mind Centering." And they said, "What's that? Can you just tell me in a couple of sentences?" I said, No, I can't. I can't tell you in a couple of sentences. And my whole thing is being really clear about embodiment. That's kind of my shtick. So it's sort of infuriating and wonderful and mystical at the same time. How would you respond to that?
I give them my card and I say, if you go to bodymindcentering.com, you can learn something about it.
You and Joe Biden. Go to my website.
Or if Len is available, my husband, I'll say, "You're on, Len." And why I don't usually do interviews, because I don't know what I do. I'm very good at it. And if you give me the problem or the celebration, whatever it is, or just something simple, I know I can engage. But about something, I don't start with the words. The words come from the experience. So there has to be an experience in order for there to be words. Otherwise, it's a memory. And I don't have a very good memory anymore.
I remember a time in London, it was maybe 6-7 years ago, I went to a workshop of yours, an introductory thing, and I wasn't getting it. And my clever brain was like, but I don't understand. And I asked the question and I was kind of frustrated. and you said, come here, and you kind of touched me and you hugged me and you sort of showed me with the body, and you gave me an experience of the thing you were teaching. And I was something about being yin or absorbing, and I went, oh, my whole system changed. I've got a body memory of it. And I went, oh, thank you.
That's exactly what happened to me. Yeah, I didn't understand all of your stuff, and then you said, now I'm touching your cells, now I'm touching your whatever. You went through all of these. It was the touch that made me understand you.
And after that, people said, what's this Bonnie Bainbridge Cohen like? And I said, oh, I don't really know what she does, but she's a genius. She's absolutely amazing. She's a genius. You know, just from that one 3-second experience kind of thing. And I think though, for listeners, maybe let's map out a little bit some of the areas you work in. So
maybe I could say something about that would help, because I can speak very clearly about that experience, because you were so clear. Your work, if I can be so bold as to try to describe it, the core, one of the cores of it to me is the mind of the cells, that whole teaching. So the way that comes through, you said, now I'm in my bones touching your bones. Now I'm in your respiratory system touching yours. Now I'm in the cerebrospinous fluid. So Bonnie can go to a consciousness of one region of the body and embody that consciousness, which evokes it in me. So that enables her, that discernment that you've done so amazingly over the years to refine, makes it possible for you to meet someone where they're needy, where they really need some help. Like, for example, with myself, it was a revelatory experience for me to experience my fluids in the way, because I would put it in your language that I was very much identified in bones, muscles, but I didn't have this fluid consciousness, which was such a big thing for me to find with you and then the osteopaths. I think this discernment of where I'm meeting the person, by which experience of my own infinite capacities that I'm zeroing in on, is the capacity that you've really refined over the years.
They could only be refined in community. So I also want to mention that whatever body mind centering is, it's community based. And
that's super important to me. It's like one of the things that I've said about her in public is that you are the systems teacher in somatic, so that all these little churches go on. Who's better? You want to go to this person, and they're better, and this. And Ida Rolf, you say, don't go to Feldenkrais, don't go to Alexander, and Alexander would say, don't go near Ida Rolf, and blah 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 blah. This way that Bonnie's had of saying that each cell has its own mind opens up the capacity for many, many methods where people will focus just on the bony body or the joint body or whatever they're doing. And so it gives us a framework. Your framework enables us to see how all of these people are part of our community. Community without one, you're leaving out something really important. So I think it's really a generous framework that you provided for us to make sense of that. Like Emily forever would say, I don't want anything to do with the muscles and bones, it's ruining the culture of the muscle and bones, I don't care about it. Then now she did her last years, because of you and me, she started to say, oh, bones aren't so bad, muscles are pretty good things. And she developed the Explore board and all that.
I remember Emily Conrad, our first, I think it was our first public presentation, because we had more private ones that Don set up. And I have to pause for a minute because I had a moment of missing her.
Yeah, me too.
She presented first at Esalen, and she presented her, there's no word, just her Emily way. And don't know the words, but it was like about this being presence, and not about bones, not about other things, just this existing in oneself. And then it was my turn, and Emily was so expressive. And then it was my turn, and I said, well, I actually look at the bones and the muscles or whatever in my more quiet way. And then that reminds me of once we were together at Omega, and the person ahead of the publicity or whatever, he wanted to interview the group of us. Dean Juhan was there, I think, and anyway, another man. Okay. And they want us to talk about ourselves, and I said, well, I don't really want to talk about me. I'll talk about you, says Emily. So I could be there. I didn't say a thing, and they never posted because I think it looked rather foolish. I think I was holding somebody's foot. And but she was just present to do whatever. She says, I'll talk about you. I said, oh, thank you.
And your presence was, I was asking people on the Facebook community for the conference ahead of this, like, what should I ask? And maybe share some stories about you. And your presence was something that people mentioned a lot. You know, I was just talking about my own mentor, Paul Linden, earlier, and saying one of the main reasons that I apprenticed with him was his loving presence. Mm-hmm. And this is this thing that keeps coming up when I mention your name, is your presence with people. Mm-hmm. So yes, there's the systems work, there's the embryological work, the developmental work, these different parts. And what sticks in people's mind, the memory often seems to be presence. Mm-hmm. Can you say a little bit about that?
I think it comes from not knowing anything. Like, it seems like I think and know a lot, but I actually don't. At the level of one's knowing. That doesn't make sense. But I don't have thoughts running around in my head.
Okay. So like, I'm interviewing you now and I'm going, oh, maybe I'll say this next and this sort of normal mental process. You don't have that so much? It's just a sort of...
No, mine is like, what I say is, for me, it's all a prayer. And it's not about praying. There's that calling. It's like it's not a particular... I have both a Jewish and Quaker background. And some Southern Baptist growing up in the South. It's not about a particular form. It's about...
This may be a good place to talk about the granddaughter. Because I think of when I hold Undine in my lap, and she's just there with me. She's just there. And I realize how chattery I am. And it's embarrassing. So that's where it's like to be with a Rinpoche, because I'm sitting there and here is this being that's just present with me. I just got to quiet down here. And I experienced that with you. That just sort of comes to you however you got there. Whereas with the Undine's a developmental kind of thing that's just kind of amazing and not easy for me because of my own chattery thing, which is not at all the way you are.
That's why I need you here, because I need the chatter. Also, I've spent so much of my adult life with babies.
Uh-huh.
Mm-hmm.
And so I feel they have been my major teachers.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, we have maybe hundreds or thousands of hours of my working with babies or children with developmental challenges, and they're deteriorating. So I'll put a plug in here if anyone has finances to support their ventral production. I think it would be great. I think they would be a great source, because I have one video for special children, which was from 85, I think, or 87. When you see them, these are children with real differences. And you see them change in a few minutes. The sessions were probably an hour long. I cut it down to half an hour to cut out some of the chatter around it. It's so profound. I thought, my God, if they can do this and they're considered disabled, what am I doing here with all the possibilities that I have? They're so beautiful. And the little ones, and I'm thinking when Tano, when your son was a baby,
Yeah, he's just about 4 months old or so, yeah. They were, Len and Bonnie were working on my son at this huge conference in Washington, D.C. in the foyer of this big auditorium. And so they were lying on the ground with him, working with him. And the doors opened and 2,000 people came walking out over the top with the three of them out there.
Just to clarify the request, because this is going out to quite a lot of people. You want someone to help with the production of the old videos that you have of you working with children with special needs,
yes,
to help make
they
that
go
into a
back
modern
to the
format.
80s. They actually started in reel-to-reel, and then we went to VHS, and each, for example, the one major one that I did get permission, we would get permissions from parents, was a boy. I think he was 6. I think it was 1985 or 87. And he drowned when he was 2, but he survived. But he was in this state. And they had done a method with him where you do a lot of patterning with people moving his body and stuff. And somehow through that, because you had many people to help with that, they discovered that I was living in Massachusetts. I don't think they were from, I'm not sure if they were from Massachusetts. Anyway, they brought him, and he was really frozen in that moment 4 years later. And I asked them, was he verbal? He was very verbal, so I thought, great. That's, first of all, I didn't think great, because I didn't think. That's what's hard to describe, but I heard. And I asked them, did he ever suck his thumb or anything? What did he like? He said, yes, he sucked his thumb. So in this video, I'm singing with him and playing with him, and all of a sudden, I don't remember what we were doing, but I was moving him, but talking to him, and I said, where's your thumb? And he looks. It was the first automatic response he'd had since he drowned. I happened to have a health issue right after that, so I never saw him again. I don't know. But that kind of thing, where like a person will bring a baby to me, I probably have this on film too, and the baby's 4 months old maybe, crying all the time, not settling, colicky, fine otherwise. I mean, a baby, he'll be fine growing up. Excuse me. And he's crying, and to me that's like, whoa. So I played with him. He's crying. I said, tell me your story. What's going on? You know, you really had a hard time. Looks up. And by the end, and his mother said, he finally came into this world, into his body. Like, listen, the baby's crying. Don't say nothing's wrong. Nothing's wrong with you. You're suffering because your child's crying. Of course something's going on. But, and this one baby that not baby, 6-year-old, another 6-year-old, who they thought was very severely neurologically challenged, seizures all the time, and not able to do any, what's the word, intentional. And in this thing, he gets very angry at me because he was also from this method of moving him. I wouldn't move him, what did he want to do? And so they didn't know if he was blind or not. And at the end, you see he's not blind, or he has the potential to see. Because it's an engagement, a meeting with, you meet they're not somewhere else. Kids that are adults too. I've worked with adults in coma, whatever. And we meet. A very, very good friend recently had a stroke a couple years and is very limited and has had different kinds of work, and I don't know if I want to say any refer name, but somebody who does BMC for many, many years went to see her and worked internally, not trying to get her to do anything, but worked internally and this person who was working with her didn't know her, they didn't know each other, and of course she wanted him to know that this wasn't who she was, right? She was a dynamic individual, wonderful woman, and so I said, tell her that her cells know everything still, but they lost the connection to her brain. And that, so we just have to build up the connections again so that the cells can feed the brain instead of the brain telling the body. And at the end of that session, she said to this person who was working with her, I feel both my legs. That's the beginning, to feel both your legs. She says, people have been asking me to do things that I can't do. Today I feel my both legs. So it's this cellular knowing, and it is a practice. It is a practice. It's a very deep practice.
I don't want a point you made to get lost, because I think it's a huge one that's forgotten. That early on, when she said a lot of for you has been about community, it's that I think this is a real failure in the somatics field work. There's a lot of emphasis on, I've got this technique that can really help your intestines, and then I do this thing on you. And Ida was that way a lot. I felt, in retrospect, we never, in the teaching, we never were...
Ida Rolf, yeah.
Yeah, we were never taught to, who are we touching? Who are we communicating with? Does this person want to be touched? So I think I think we've all embodied that, you and Robert and Emily and all of our friends, we've developed our intimacy with each other. And that reflects in the work. So I think of Robert's community, Robert Hall, who just died not too long ago, and Emily. They were communities of love. They were communities of caring and friendship. And that I feel that really needs to be embodied in the teaching. I'm sure you, like me, just see these endless things about people are buying into some kind of exotic fix thing that's then very marketed, and and people give away their being to this. So I think this emphasis you put on how do we develop presence. So one of my first teachers that opened my world was Carl Rogers. But I couldn't do what he did. I couldn't sit and just be with people. I had to kind of get into all my cells so I could be there. Yeah. But I don't want to miss that point of it. I think that's so important in all of this.
Yeah, the community.
The community part of it is really, really important. Yeah, like we had a doctoral presentation yesterday by an extraordinary woman who did her doctorate on somatics and tantra, but going back to 8th century texts and recovering a feminist view of it all. And it was a very communal work. Our team was really great, and her friendships who supported her, and she and me and another friend all had babies and grandbabies during this process. And so there was a real camaraderie about it, and all came out yesterday. It was such a great dissertation defense because we were all interactive and participating in really meaningful things. And it wasn't just kind of her being a star or anything.
So I'd like to make a link between some of the things we've been talking about. So you're known for systems work as well as the developmental and other pieces, different body systems. I was prepared for this interview. I was meditating this morning, muscles, bones, rather than body parts. I was doing a sort of BMC type meditation this morning, and it's different. I definitely feel different than when I'm in a yoga class which is fascially orientated compared to one which is more bone or more muscular. You have different teachers and they orientate around different systems. And you've also got just the richest background of practice. Like if I had to name someone in the world who has mapped through experience, not just cognitively like I do, but through experience, different embodiment practices. Like for example, I know your aikido background is incredibly rich with incredibly good teachers, and that's just the one that I personally know, and there's all these others. And you've integrated that in a truly integrative practice. And I think very few people have achieved that because it's an absurd amount of work to study all the things you've studied. And then, Don, you've been at the kind of epicenter of the somatic renaissance starting in the 60s and Esalen and California and San Francisco, and you know all these great people, some of whom are now past, like Emily Conrad, or talking about Michael Murphy earlier. These are huge names that have come together in the West. This meeting of psychotherapy and Eastern practices particularly. And then me in the conference, this is the 21st century coming together of, we have 10 different tracks on the conference, and there's people from all around the world, most international thing you could imagine, and people who couldn't afford to fly out to an intensive in California, and so many different kinds of practices. And last conference, people were saying, I didn't know I was an embodiment person. I didn't know there was a name for it. And I just said, well, that's one name and it's one umbrella term. And this coming together in the 21st century in another way. So I've seen you do it in your own practice. And John, you've been a part of this scene in this epicenter. And now it's happening in a kind of 21st century online way. So talk about community and the importance of community and systems. There's where I go with that. Any response to that?
Bravo, wonderful, amen. This is just the natural way of each person and then each generation holding the space, which I read in your book is not a phrase that you naturally use, but I use quite a bit. Hold our own space. So one of the feelings that I have held, or dreams, or a dream with roots, is that wherever, for example, body-mind centering, wherever it would, in whomever, it's about embodiment. It's somebody said, what is body-mind centering? And the best thing I could think of was whatever works is fine. Well, I'll say now that we have programs in 18, I think, countries, something like that. And the vision wasn't 18, 19, 2, but wherever it would be in the culture of its own self. Mm-hmm. So theoretically, I'm still the, CEO, director, something. I signed the certificate. I'm still writing study guides occasionally, and what else?
So somehow CEO seems incredibly inappropriate, but it just doesn't fit.
Well, I don't know
somehow.
what CEO means in words, so maybe.
Chief Executive Officer, like the head.
Well, I just mean that I'm still, let's say,
Sure.
my name is still at the top. Educational director, I think, is the term. But I have nothing to do with the day-to-day transmission. It's all local. And Gloria Desideri, just yesterday I got the new book in Italian. They did another edition and they changed, and it's different. They put different things on different pages. So is that legal in a way to take a book and translate it and turn it around? Yes. Because now the book was originally in the 80s. 21st century, it's 21st century book. And the one in Brazil is orange in the color. It's got a little orange in it.
Cover of my book's in Brazilian, in Portuguese, and orange too. I guess.
Yeah.
A bit of vibrancy, bit of
Yeah,
colour.
right.
Yeah, it's Brazilian. It's not
Yeah.
coming out of Massachusetts and New England. So there's something about, also at the beginning of a class often, depending on how long the workshop or how many people, to have everyone stand. So I have to do it. And hear your name. Take your space. Bonnie. Bonnie. Let everybody hear. Absorb. And then sit down. And then look at the next person. And for some people it would be like, oh my God, we're going to waste all of this time
Right.
with people saying
Wasting
their names,
time, right.
which we're not going to remember anyway.
Right.
And someone else says, oh my God, I can't do this. They're going to not hear one name because they're so worried about what they're going to say. And then when they finish, they're like, oh, thank God. And then they're
Check
resting because they said their name. And some people will come late to class if they know that that's the class I'm going to do it, so that they don't have to do it. And I'm getting quite strict about it. And someone said,
I had the same experience, doing the same thing, with the same results. It's very striking.
And it's the idea to actually just be really present to each other, that hey, this is the important stuff. This isn't the warm-up before the class.
That's right.
This is
Right.
being
This is the
seen
highlight
and
of
being
the
named and
class.
being present, and this is it. This is the highlight. This is the center.
and I just am doing this once a month, just 3 hours on a Sunday for 9 months. And it was only on the 6th class that I asked people to stand and say their name. Because 3 hours, if you did it the first class, the class would be over. But usually it's the first. It could be the second. Once I did it over a 6-week period. We were there 5 days a week, 6 days. 5 days, 6 weeks, 7 weeks. And had just so many each day. But then the poor people who were at the end, they were like suffering for several weeks. But it's also getting easier for the people who come back. And even the people who don't come back, because more people are getting more comfortable, more people are getting comfortable who haven't been there.
I want to embellish a little bit on your 21st century thing, because a couple of things. What struck me, that led me to a lot of this stuff we've all done together, is when I was training at Esalen in the 60s with Ida, what I noticed was we would go with Ida and she would say, don't have anything to do with all these other people. And Feldenkrais was there and he would say, don't have anything to do with these other people. And they were all these groups. But in the dining room, everybody talked with each other.
Yep.
All the people talked with each other. And we found out they were doing fascinating things in these other groups, even though the teachers were sitting in their corners not wanting to talk to the other people. So I thought that model of going to Esalen, and I was so blessed. I mean, I'm so grateful to Michael Murphy, who kind of gave me Esalen over the last 50 years to do what I wanted to do. It was a great gift. To bring people to live together in the big house, where they're all of the stars are there, living together, eating together, standing in line to the bathroom. It created an environment, and it seems to me you're doing this in the web.
Yeah.
So you're extending that realm where people are talking together. And just a footnote on that. So, did you go to Italy with us, to Camaldoli? I can't remember.
I went to. I don't think.
Where we all went to Italy. We went to Rome and stuff. So
no,
I
didn't go there. I went to Austria with you.
Oh, to Austria, yeah. No. So I got a grant from Lawrence Rockefeller to do this project on the body and spirituality, and part of it, we took our whole group to Tuscany, to the old Camaldoli monastery up above Arezzo, and the spirituality of the Benedictines, their fundamental spirituality is hospitality. And I thought that, and Michael Murphy always says that what makes Esalen work is seeing that the meals are served and the house is clean. And so this business of getting a platform so that people can get beyond their divisions and get beyond their ego shit. I guess I shouldn't say those things.
That's fine. My audience, that's really not a problem.
That what you're doing is in a much bigger way. That kind of thing where throwing people together and saying, work it out here. This is what's going on, and giving them a place where they can really not be so defensive.